I'm going to cover all of the economic news, the ongoing riots by millions of people across Europe, what austerity means, and what this global program intends to put into place. So much of it has now actually transpired that we predicted. It wasn't hard to do. It's a IMF World Bank public plan that they have perfected in third world nations, now bringing to Western Europe, England, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, as well as areas of Eastern Europe and Asia. But we're going to fire out the toll-free number on any issue or any item or any topic you want to discuss. But I would hope that listeners would call in and give me your view on where you see this economic crisis going and what you think the American people are going to do. What's happening to businesses in your area. We're going to be discussing it all today. And we've got the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, joining us coming up in the third hour. Phil Berg pops in for 30 minutes in the middle of the next hour on his rally in D.C. that he's finally launching. Very happy to see that, dealing with Barry Soetoro, a.k.a. Barack Obama's birth certificate, and the rest of it. So that is all coming up today. The toll-free number to join us is 1-800-259-9231, 1-800-259-9231, and we'll get you up and on the air. Look at this news I've got here in front of me. It is just all incredible. Here's Der Spiegel, Obama's lost magic. It just doesn't have the magic anymore. 6 months into his presidency, he had the lowest approval rating of any president 6 months in. And a year in, it was the same trend. And a year and a half, and now close to 2 years in, it's the same story. But the globalists planned that all along. Now they will discard him politically. Probably going to run Hillary for president, or at least vice president, discharging the current vice president, Joe Biden. And they'll try to have the novelty of a woman running for vice president. And, oh, the women all want to vote. It'll be different if they just get a woman in there, when Hillary helped ram through the end of Glass-Steagall in 1999, allowing the thousands of trillions of derivatives to be pumped out on a planetary scale and for the taxpayers of the globe to be handed the bill. Thank you very much, Hillary Clinton. And their counterparts, whether it was Tony Blair or whether it was Francois Mitterrand or the French, German leaders, all of them, the Greek leaders, all 11 years ago, the Spanish leaders, the Portuguese leaders, the Japanese leaders, globally, they all removed rules on derivatives and just said the sky's the limit. Select global banks can just issue all the fake counterfeit financial instruments they want. That's just the way it is. So we're going to be discussing that, obviously, today. But stocks, of course, are plunging on bad earnings for Apple and many, many others. And we have just chaos all over Europe, the epicenter being France, where the average Frenchman pays over 80% in taxes in one way or the other. The average Frenchman, some people only pay around 60, some of the rich pay upwards of 90, but on average, and it's basically set by the Organization of Economic and Cooperative Development, the OECD, that France and Germany were basically reorganized under during the Marshall Plan after World War II. And the UN and the Club of Rome and the CFR have all said that France is the model with a global tax rate that they're shooting for of 84%. France isn't quite at 84, but they're very close. England, over 60%. The United States, on average, you pay federal taxes in one way or another of close to 50%. And they call the United States a tax haven or a tax avoidance center, kind of like some areas of the Caribbean or Luxembourg or Monte Carlo or Switzerland. And they are pushing to, quote, remove the loopholes so that, because the global government doesn't work if you can run to the United States or run somewhere else that has lower taxes. You've got to have global coordination of taxes and regulations, and that's what this global government is. And through the crises that the globalists have publicly designed, lovingly, caringly, sparing no expense, they plan to now bring this system in with a standardized global army, global court, global regulations. Of course, the World Trade Organization is one of the major beta tests of that now for the last 15 years, having more authority over our trade than our Congress. Just a microcosm example of all of that. But looking at France right now, I want to go over some of those news items and then to your calls. As French strikes continue, country runs out of gas, out of petrol, out of diesel. As the ongoing strikes in France against austerity continue, and what did Bill Still talk about with The Secret of Oz yesterday? It's a simple equation. The vast majority, next year approaching 2/3, and it accelerates from there, of the tax money you pay goes not to roads, not to battleships, not to cruise missiles, not to government employees' paychecks, not to welfare moms. And all of that is bad one way or another. But at least a welfare mom takes her food stamp card, here in Texas, her Lone Star card, and goes down to the corner store and, you know, buys hamburger meat and cereal and lettuce and tomatoes or whatever. At least some money goes into the economy. As much as I don't like the military-industrial complex system getting over $2 trillion a year one way or the other, at least a lot of that goes to defense contractor jobs, building bombs and cruise missiles and submarines and B-2 bombers. At least some of the money ends up in people's hands at the grassroots to then go to Dillard's and buy a new suit or a pair of tennis shoes, or to go to Wally World and buy something, to go to Walmart or Target, or to pay the neighbor kid to mow your lawn, or to hire employees. But that's not the case under this system. So I want to explain that. In Nigeria, in Costa Rica, and they haven't even been totally imploded yet, in Brazil, in just countless other countries. In some cases, if you look at Nigeria, they pay over 90% of their tax money to debt service. And there's famous cases in Nigeria, one of the best case point examples of where they got $1 billion loan from the IMF back in the 60s. And last time I checked, they'd paid over $50 billion on interest on that $1 billion. Because by the time they started paying it off, it was in the tens of billions. And they still owe another 50-something billion. So they're going to end up paying hundreds of billions of dollars on a $1 billion loan. And the IMF and World Bank gave them that loan, and many subsequent ones to pay off the old loans. And it was literally created out of thin air, but backed up by countries that contribute to the IMF World Bank Private Consortium Fund, and the UN puts out all this propaganda about it's helping poor people. Yeah, poor bankers. And so your tax money backed it up. Well, now the bankers are just saying, look, we're even done with that. You'll still have your dollars and your pounds and your yens and your yans and your euros and your shekels and you'll still have all of those. You'll still have the peso in Mexico. You'll still have the peso, you know, down in Guatemala. You still have the peso in other Latin American countries, but they're all going to be globally set by this G20 consortium of central banking heads. This is on record. And they will set the interest rates and play currencies off against each other. Just like the G20 announced last year that they were having coordinated devaluation of the currencies, a coordinated, unified strategy. And now here we are a year and a half later, and they're going, oh, my goodness, there's a currency war. Countries are fighting with each other to see who can lower their currencies faster. This is causing hyperinflation. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve comes out, the North American branch of this group, and says, oh, we're going to have quantitative easing and money printing to pay off the debt. But then they go, oh, isn't it horrible? Currencies are going down. They openly carry out the policy and then go, oh, my gosh, it's terrible what it's doing. We've got an answer. Give us more power. And so now, for the last 5 years, they've been issuing SDRs. I have confirmed that in overseas shipping, it's printed on USPS, U.S. Postal Service. Its conversion rate, it's about 1.5, takes 1.59 SDRs. One SDR is worth $1.59. So we're already under SDRs. It's like 2 years ago, the Texas Workforce Commission sent me a letter. Before it was even in WorldNet Daily, I'd noticed this. And then about 2 weeks later, it was in WorldNet Daily. Jerome Corsi wrote a story about it, but I can confirm it. And back then, I guess 2 years ago, we had about 15 employees and contractors. And the Texas Workforce Commission sent me a letter about increased worker comp taxes and insurance taxes and things. It's all going up every time I turn around. And it said, now under federal government rules, we do not report to the federal government. We report to the North American Union body. And I showed that Texas Workforce Commission letter here on air. And, of course, he got copies of them around the country. It's kind of like before health care even passed earlier this year. Remember in Illinois, and we showed this on air and also wrote an article about it, and then mainstream media picked it up, that they were already instructing businesses on the new taxes and on how under federal law they had to get insurance, and the state was implementing it before the law was even passed. That's because this global governance puts all this in place and then tells you about it later. Kind of like by 1993, every state in the United States, all 50, had standardized driver's license issuance under the federal government. Itself, in 2000, a UN summit in Australia, where they unified globally the driver's license and passports. And so here we are 10 years later, and they're just now getting around to telling you about global IDs. And a decade plus after we already had a national ID card, they got around to telling you. But it still has your state on it. So it looks like it's local. Same thing with these SDRs. And so we're already in the world government. That's kind of like they had the 50th anniversary of the EU in 2007. Because in 1957, they did set up the EU with the Treaty of Rome. I have a copy of it. It's in the film Endgame. It's online. You can read it. But they told the Europeans they were in an EU in 2000. They were in it in 1957. We're already in the NAU. All the different financial news is just amazing. But I want to quantify this very simply. Because I have this gut check every day now, multiple times a day. It shocks my intellect when I realize just how real this world government is, just how real the weaponization of the medical system against us is, just how real all the Rockefeller Foundation documents are about chemicals and pathogens added to vaccines to give us cancer and sterilize us. I mean, that's real. The government shooting up Guatemalan children with syphilis, that's real. This year, the UN worldwide giving children weaponized polio and murdering them is AP and CBS, but they report it like it's no big deal. Bayer Pharmaceuticals shipping out over 1 million ampules of factor VIII blood product with knowing it had HIV in it, on record, and hepatitis. That's real. The government knowing DU is a death sentence for our military. That's real. The Model States Health Emergency Powers Act, Force Inoculation Program, that's real. The National Emergency Centers Act for FEMA camps, that's real. The military openly announcing they will patrol and take over the U.S. during financial collapse. Guess what? It wasn't for al-Qaeda, like I told you 9 years ago. That's real. This is all real. This is all really happening. And more and more I wake up at 1, 2, 3 in the morning after I've been asleep a few hours because I control my fear. I control my concern when I'm conscious and awake because I'm on a mission. But when I'm asleep, I end up having dreams about this. I guess you'd call them nightmares. And every night now, I just wake up, I'm in the dark, I walk around the house, I go into my children's bedrooms, I look at them, innocent, good, sweet, they deserve to not live under tyranny. And I just sat on the couch for about an hour last night, just wishing I was wrong, wishing 9/11 wasn't an inside job, wishing that our country wasn't imploded by design, wishing, because I know how bad it's going to be, not just for my family, but your family, and for all the foolish people that are compartmentalized and dumbed down, who've been given a false mental template of society, all the people that are enabling this to happen by sitting on the bench or actively helping the globalist. We've had crooks take over our society, and they develop scientific systems to dumb people down and to misdirect and control populations. And it is even more horrific and more real than I had first, years ago surmised from their own admissions and documents. And I want to ask callers, do you have these gut checks? Are you concerned? Because I call it fear. When I'm awake and conscious right now, I'm not afraid.